Welcome to the Elastos Orchard deep dive. It's the first deep dive we've ever done. We asked you, all of our listeners and viewers, what you wanted us to talk about, and you voted to hear about the business models for the smart web, for the decentralized web. They're different, of course. All businesses are going to have to think differently about how they operate, given all of the tools and the functionality that the Elastos smart web will bring. So our resident expert in this is Jochem. So we're going to ask him to dive deeply into it, and Sasha and I are going to ask questions as we go along and contribute where we can. But over to you, Jochem.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. One of the things that we need to keep in the back of our heads right now is that we just have, 30 minutes, give or take, to come from nothing to a decentralized business model, which is fairly fast. So when we do this at our university, it takes us about 10 weeks. And the starting point there is that students already know what the platform economy is all about, what the sharing economy is all about. So that's the starting point. They obviously know what pipelines to companies are, which are the traditional companies. And we help them to think from that point to decentralized business models. Then, in my opinion, there are two different types that we could talk about. These are the decentralized business models for businesses. And B would be a decentralized business model for a community-owned dApp. In my opinion, if we really want to create the first killer dApp, then we should not just sit back and wait for anyone to build it on Elastos or for the Elastos, but we should build it ourselves. A community-based dApp has, in my opinion, a totally different approach, because that's where you really want to stimulate the uses of these tokens. Okay, so let's kick off. I think that the fastest way for anyone to learn how to build a decentralized business model is to do a couple of thoughts, a couple of brainwaves. And the fastest route is the following one. The fastest route is that you look at an existing platform, so a platform that you like, and I would not advise you to choose the big one. So don't go for the Spotifys and the Facebook, but choose a platform that focuses on a niche, because it's the effect that you can reach there is a lot bigger. And then try to decentralize it. Well, that's not that easy as I make it sound. So there are a couple of steps that you can take in order to really get there. The first step is that you look at a platform and you look at all the different stakeholders within that platform. And the second step is that you map out those different stakeholders and the relationships that they have towards either each other or the platform. So how do communication streams go? How do value streams go? Think of value not just as money, but think of value as creative value, or the value to be seen, or different kind of values that you can add. Then once you've mapped that, the next step is to find out what kind of pains people feel within that ecosystem. Because when you know the pains that people have to deal with, you know what to solve, right? And that's all that business is really about, solving people's problems. Once you've mapped it all out, that's the step where you can start decentralizing it. And in order to decentralize things, you need to know what kind of tools you have at your disposal. So a couple of them are literally behind me here. So we've got the carrier network, we've got the Elastos, we've got decentralized storage, we've got a whole bunch of stuff that we can use to decentralize, and the different levels of centralization and decentralization, but that's a topic for a different moment. One of the tools that we use in our education is the blockchain revolution, written by Don Tapscott. In my opinion, it's very much focused on the approach of one platform only, but it helps you in two ways. It will show you 7 different business models, so 7 different types of business models that you could use, which will help you in your inspiration, and it gives 7 different design principles. When you know that, and when you know a thing or two more about all the tools that you've got at your disposal, all open source, and again, they're behind me here, then you can start creating your platform. So this is one route. The other route is actually my favorite, which doesn't start from a platform, but starts from an ecosystem or from an industry. So you can also look at an industry, gaming industry, for example, and look at all those different players in that industry, and then identify the pain points. when you identify the pain points of all the players in the industry, you will see that there's an overlap. Some different stakeholders might have very similar kind of pains. When you connect those together, including the knowledge that you have about decentralization and all the tools at your disposal, that's where you see that whole new platforms will emerge, whole new solutions will emerge. And that is really, really interesting. That said, this is quite a challenging project, right? And this is also where we as Orchard can come in. So I know that a lot of people that own businesses are listening to our podcast. And for those interested, if you really want to add a new business model to what you already have, here we are. So feel free to reach out to us and we will help you there. In fact, we already do it right now with some clients, and Wednesday next week we'll have another meeting, Chris, Sash and I, with one of the clients that we will work with who's very interested in starting working with Elastos components. So there are real use cases to it. Now, what I would like to do next is make it a little bit more tangible by using a very practical example. And the example is something that comes from actually a student of mine. So it's not my work, it's someone else's work. And she did a fairly interesting job on decentralizing an existing platform. But before we go there, may I ask Chris or Sash if you've got anything to add already here, or any kind of questions that you might have before we dive a little bit deeper?
I was just going to jump in there. So I suppose from my side, what is the purpose of using blockchain technology? And I'd say it's because it's creating trust in a trustless environment. So for a business, it's kind of, you're using blockchain as a tool in order to help create a better ecosystem in which people can benefit. And in theory, you're taking out a layer of management, which is done, autonomously through the kind of collective, computers collectively working together and everyone working as a collective. So there's the security mechanisms themselves. And then I suppose, what do you think, Jochem, is the benefits of open source projects themselves compared to normal businesses aside from using blockchain?
I think the big advantage of open source is that it's continuously monitored by the community. So it's continuously improved. People are dedicated to making it better. And then, you would wonder what is then the business model behind open source, right? Well, for the technical part, at the moment we've got Chum Tech, or the Elastos Academy, and they can really help businesses integrate this new software that we pretty much have. So all these new solutions that are being built, and they're going to do something with the DID login, for example, which is really interesting. And it's a very beautiful signal that you can give to your customers that they can log in with their DID, which pretty much means a safe, secure, but also private login. It's a big signal that you can give to your customers, but it's very likely that not everyone knows how to do it. So the advantage of open source is that it's always monitored, and there's a huge amount of people that are continuously dedicated to improving it. The commercial applications for it is that not everyone has the expertise to actually apply that knowledge and use it. So one of the big use cases for companies that want to start, tech companies that want to start with Elastos, is just by studying all the different components. It's all open source, it's all just there to use, and build their own consulting company on top of that. Similar to what Red Hat is doing, for example. It's a huge company, still dedicated to adding value to the open source code, and they have got the biggest clients in the world just because they work for them. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's my
that's 100%, because it certainly seems like as time goes on, there's going to be a shift to want to use this kind of technology, because you think of the scrutiny that Facebook have come over, and it's that idea of the code being so hidden. Will show us the code, what's going on behind the scenes. And as companies start to probably incorporate it or start to open source their products, you're going to see trust kind of start to build around them, and you're going to probably see other companies shift, I think. It's certainly like a very interesting area, and looking forward, something that we need, because companies can dictate price, and they can they can build a product and say, you know, this is our price, and you can kind of, as a central source of authority, you kind of trust them that they can, you know, maintain this information for you. But a lot of the time it gets breached, or another hacker or someone can attack and take it from them. So I suppose there's two elements from my side, which would be the side of being able to open source something where the price is dictated by everyone. And then two is allowing anyone in the world to actually proactively contribute to the ecosystem. Because if you're, say, a big American corporation doing one thing that's closed off, you might be missing out on talent that's otherwise in another part of the world that you're not seeing, or you know, it's not there. So it's a really interesting area.
Yeah, I totally second that. Maybe in addition to that, it's interesting for people to know as well that a lot of the components, the Elastos components, are already ready to use, right? So
yeah,
the beauty of this is that you no longer need to build a blockchain for yourself, right? So we've got the Ethereum sidechain working, and the DID sidechain working is incredibly valuable, but it's also incredibly expensive to build. The beauty of this is that you no longer need to spend all those costs into building this kind of blockchain, because it's there and it's paid for by the community, and it's just ready. Yeah, it's just there for people to use, for business to use. So we're moving beyond the idea of, well, when you want to do something with blockchain, you need to build your own blockchain, to these very high quality, high level blockchains are there. They're in our ecosystem, and you can just use it. And that's pretty awesome. Progressive, actually. That's Chris, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, well, just picking up on that last point, there's quite an interesting discussion about curation of ideas rather than creation of ideas. So this open source a gift to the world that Elastos is, you know, we're presenting the essential elements of Elastos. They're already built. So organizations can curate those. They don't have to create them. What they have to create is, and what you've been talking about in your introduction, is the business idea that takes their current model and shifts it to a different paradigm. And I think that's what some people find hard, because if they're doing well at the moment, if they're running a cash cow, or they've got a really good supply chain set up, if they've got really good customer bases with the current methodology they're using, then the question they're going to ask is, well, why do we need to change? Which is exactly what Sasha asked right at the start. So I think that's important to come back to the purpose again. You know, why do I need to worry about this? Why is this now important for me to consider in my business approach, in my strategy? There's so much happening in the world right now. And one of the issues that we've discussed already today is about transparency and trust, and the fact that those are weakening across society. And there's greater expectation with so many people at the moment for so much more. And we can deliver that if we use these new tools. So let's dig in further to those design principles and business models.
All right, let's do that. So I'm going to share my screen, and you should be able to see something that's called Unsplash, Digital Photography Decentralized. This is created by a student called Lara, and obviously I respect her privacy, so that's all the details that I'll give to you. But Lara is a 24-year-old, fourth year, so she's in the last year. And in my opinion, if a student who some 10 weeks ago had never heard of decentralization, if she can come up with its very first ideation of a decentralized business model, then I think that more seasoned entrepreneurs should definitely be possible to do something similar. Mm-hmm. Again, this is a very first ideation. Some elements might be possible, other elements might not be possible, but it doesn't really matter for this first ideation. But this is something that anyone can do, and then this we can use as a starting point to build our business even further. Takes about 10 weeks for someone to get to this point. So then you go from the understanding of the platform economy, the sharing economy, to decentralized business models. So, but you could have guessed it. She looked at Unsplash as a platform. So she took the fastest route, Unsplash as a platform. And the first thing that she did is she mapped the ecosystem. Now, I'm not 100% sure if these are all the stakeholders in the ecosystem, but let's assume that these are the key stakeholders. then, well, I think that we can imagine that most of the money would come from the top one, right? So Unsplash in the middle. It's not the user in the middle. It's not the creative in the middle. No, it's the platform in the middle. I think that she's done that deliberately. And the corporations are the ones that are bringing in the money. But then if you go to the left-hand side, you'll see the users. And the users play a role in the sense that there's advertising and they give their data and that's worth money. But you can also see that they can download the content for free, and so can the corporations, by the way. So if you're a business who wants to start, who wants to do an ad campaign, you can just source the photos from the platform for free. Then on the right-hand side, you see that the creative, so the photographer in this case, is somewhere involved as well. So yeah, she or he is the person who actually gives them the content. And in my opinion, the photographers, they kind of have no other way out, because if you don't show your work or some of your work on Unsplash, then you're not taken seriously by those big corporates. So it's an important place for photographers to gain credibility. And in a minute, we'll see what's wrong there, or what their pain points are. And then obviously there's a curation team who makes sure that all the photos are uploaded in the high resolution and that sort of stuff. So bottom line, this is more or less the ecosystem of Unsplash. So then the second thing that she did is she dove into the pain points from a creative point of view. There might be pain points for the advertisers, there might be pain points for the curation team, I don't know, but she focused on the creative pains. The biggest creative pains that she found here are these three. So the first one is the valueless exposure. And valueless exposure pretty much means that no accreditation is necessary. So if you use an image in your ad campaign or on your website or whatever, you don't need to credit the photographer. So in real life, many people might know the images, the one that you see here perhaps. So you know the image, you know the photo, but you don't know who took the photo, which for a photographer is pretty painful because you're the one who did all the work. And then there's no real appreciation for the creative work, not in terms of money or recommendations or anything, because any company can take those images, $1 billion company can take those images, use it in their ad campaign, and the photographer will never have any income from that. Which is a bit sad, right? So on one hand, as a photographer, you need to be there because this is the place where you can gain credibility. But whatever you put out there, you're not going to earn anything of that part of the creative work. Then there's no ownership. So the moment the images are uploaded, it's no longer yours, even if it's taken down. And these images can be used for any kind of purpose. So if there's a company who wants to use these images for fake news, then they can do that. And then the last one, that's a funny one, which has to do with liability. So what Unsplash says is that we are not liable for anything that happens with the images that are on this platform, that occur on this platform, that are uploaded here. Which means that, for example, as a photographer, if you use a model and you agree with the model that is going to be uploaded in Unsplash, and then it's used for fake news, for example, the model will never be able to sue Unsplash, but they will be able to sue the photographer. That's really a situation that you'd like to avoid.
Can I just ask you some questions about that, Jochem? So, if you just go back a slide, these pain points are what is dealt with now by photographers, so that they put a watermark over their image, for example, before they upload it, so that the uploaded image is not appropriate to be used, but they're having to destroy their artwork to a certain extent in order to prevent other people using it. Or they they sell their artwork to large corporations, large photo libraries who then control it. And they can, as you're saying, they then can use that or sell that imagery to whomever they like. And of course, those large libraries are going to get a cut of that. So we're saying that what she's trying to do here is work through and get rid of some of those areas by decentralizing it and removing that middleman.
That's where she will head to. In the case of Unsplash and a couple of others as well, places where I source a lot of images as well, by the way, pexels.com, for example, these images there, they don't have any watermarks. So it works kind of like a reputation kind of system where the most popular, most downloaded images are ranked the highest. And by building a reputation that way, you gain credibility as a photographer.
Okay.
So any image there is just free for use, high resolution, no watermark, no nothing. There are other platforms that indeed apply a watermark, which should not be too difficult to do. And then the watermark can be removed once it's paid for.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So I hadn't realized at the start that Unsplash was a real company that she was reviewing.
Yeah, these are real platforms. Other questions?
It's such a, just to say, it's such a common issue on the internet in itself. And you think, from my background within the creative industries, whether it's film and music, it's, there's no tracking, no ownership really. And the only way we really do get ownership tracking is through using a website and having, someone who controls as a middleman that information. And the biggest problem there is then you get, Spotify, or in this scenario, you get someone who's doing, in Instagram even, they take the data and they monetize off you using their platform, and you actually as a creative get nothing back. So these are such massive pain points that can be applied in so many different business applications, not necessarily just photography. It's a very common internet issue.
I think that last point is really crucial, isn't it? It's about being given a fair reward for your creativity. This site is being funded by photographers who want to build their reputation, but know they have to give up their work and earn no money at that point for uploading their photo. And of course, then they have no control of where that photo goes either.
Yeah, exactly. And actually value as an incentive, as you mentioned it, is one of the key design principles behind these ideas of hers. So that's a very
security surely as well, because there's such security flaws in having websites and hosting them on servers that if we can create an alternate, decentralized model, then you've kind of got that aspect covered as well.
Because if you think about it from the user's perspective, they might go to a website but not have any understanding of the security of that particular website as a third party. So you could be downloading a photo which is just ones and zeros of code, but within it could be anything.
And just the security information, you talk about decentralized IDs, you've just having so many scattered, logins for different websites and not understanding the security measures that each website has and the vulnerabilities of your personal information just being, yoinks. You think, just that element of being in control. It's such for a decentralized application and as a strategy, you're taking away so much pain points in not having to deal with people's personal data because it's all theirs and encrypted and they're in control of it. And so you don't get all these queries of, what's my login address? I've forgotten my password. And this is all big expenses which companies have to do today to, cover their customers. But by giving users control of their data and allowing them to cover that, actually, you're taking away a huge bulk process as a business, which is burdensome and costs money.
Exactly. Yeah,
I think that these are very good points. And just for the listeners or the viewers, we're already talking about 3 design principles, right? So the value as an incentive, very obvious, the security and the privacy. So the privacy of the users is a very important design principle here as well. And we're already talking about it without even realizing, but this shows how important those design principles are. So then the second thing that she did is she had a look at the users. And many users really feel that there's really not a creative community. So there's not a creative community between fans and photographers. There's no incentive for people to really support those photographers or to engage with them. And she even found a way to include other creative parties, so web developers, web designers, advertisers, any other kind of creative to engage. So there's a big lack of a community kind of approach. And what a lot of people, a lot of users complain about is that there's not really an educational aspect. So you never really know the details behind the work. You see the image, maybe a bit of a description, and that's it. So now we can have a look at the business model that she created. And as you can see, she moved the platform to the right bottom corner. Again, I don't know if she did this deliberately, but you can see that there are all these value streams, and this is not just money. It can be tokens, it can be communication streams. They, a lot of these different stakeholders are somehow connected together. Now, I cannot exactly replicate the story that she told, can't do it, but I can try to explain what we see here. So let's start at the left-hand side first. This is where she focused on that community building. So what she says is that we want to have a kind of like a peer-to-peer reputation system for creative work. So whenever there's a photographer who uploads something, then it should be the community to build that reputation for that photographer. And that can be done by usage, so other creatives could use it, or other creatives could vote for them. So those are the active users, people that actively would download photos, would purchase photos, and use it in their creative work. But you can also have fans that would just like to know more about a particular piece of work, and they all should be able to somehow add to the community. And this is where tokenization is a very useful concept. It can be tokenized, it can also be just votes that are not tokenized, but the reason why you would tokens is to make it a trustless system. So you could do it in a centralized database as well, but if you automate everything with the use of a simple blockchain that calculates the votes, that keeps track of the votes, is the easiest way, I think, to do it. So on the left-hand side, you can see that you can create some sort of community and some sort of engagement between those users. Then on the right top-hand side, you would see the corporations, and these are the ones that somehow would be very interested in either advertising on the platform or having a direct and private communication channel with those photographers. And this is very close to a business model that the three of us have actually worked on. I won't be able to tell too much about that business model, but what you could do here is you could set up a system where those corporations can connect directly with the photographer, give them an assignment. I need, I don't know, a picture of these shoes in the desert, and the photographer can accept it, and then when it's delivered, payment can be done. That can be hyper secure, hyper peer-to-peer. In fact, Hyper is actually the right name there, because Hyper is our chat business that enables fully private peer-to-peer communication. So a similar kind of system using a carrier you could use here. These private channels are pretty awesome because it will there's no data leakage, and it will enable direct relationship between them. Then again, what I also said is those corporations, Harley-Davidson, for example, could choose to advertise on this platform. But what do they need? They need data. And this is where that other design principle can come back in, which is the privacy part. Because within an ideal decentralized business model, users have the right to own their own data. And that means that you don't need to completely encapsulate the data. That's not necessarily important. What real privacy is that you decide as a user when and to whom you sell your data. That's what privacy is. Do you want to sell it? Yes. Then against what price? Or do you not want to sell it and then it stays with you? So in a decentralized world, that doesn't mean that you cannot have any advertising there. can still be possible. This, by the way, also shows the importance of what DMA had been working on, and unfortunately they had to stop at one point. But this is decentralized marketing. Actually, this part of this is decentralized advertising. If you want to bring in real businesses into the Elastos ecosystem, then you need to facilitate that. And in this case, you would need, for example, a data marketplace where people or a group of people can sell their data to advertisers, or can only sell it or lease it pretty much for a short period of time and get something for that in return, tokens. Those are tokens. That can be done in ELA. That's very interesting. A big challenge there, whether this is a business model for the smart web or a business model for a business, an actual business, the big challenge there is that right top corner needs some form of centralization. Sorry, not decentralization, centralization. Why? Because these corporations that you see here, they will not go out, purchase ELA, and then purchase advertising space or purchase data. It's not going to happen. So you need some form of centralization there. If you want to have a fiat gateway into a decentralized system, very difficult, very difficult. So you need to have some kind of centralized agency, hey, business model for Orchard maybe, who can facilitate the payment or the purchase of ELA without those advertisers really having to own any ELA, because they just want to have the data and the advertising space. So that's a whole new service that you can offer. So she uses tokenization on the left-hand side for votes, but she also uses tokenization to make the direct payment and the direct connection between the photographers easier. Now, there are a couple of interesting thoughts here that come from the community, and I just want to touch upon that, because in the ideal world, and this comes from Garnet, and Garnet is obviously building decentralized business models for the film industry. So if you need one creative who knows everything about that area, touch base with him. Got a lot of respect for him. And what he says is that these photographers, ideally, they want to be paid, well, obviously, ideally in fiat, right? Euros, dollars, pounds. That's the ideal situation. In a decentralized world, that's quite difficult. We as Orchard might be able to facilitate that it's easy for them to trade their ELA for euros, but yeah, that's only going to be possible in the long run. So what he says is, first goal is obviously fiat money. Second goal would then be a stablecoin. Because these photographers, they will probably not be too interested in being paid in a coin that is very volatile, right? If you can get paid in a stable coin, then at least you know exactly what you would get. And then the third option is a token. It could be a Unsplash token. It could be ELA as well. Now, I partly agree with that, because you actually need to take a step back. Right now, if we looked at the Unsplash model, these photographers are not getting paid. Not from the advertising income, not from a direct connection that they could have with corporations where they could accept assignments. They are not getting paid. So they feel the biggest pain. While Unsplash takes a very decent cut. So the reality is that any kind of money is good. This is also the reason why in the latest music project, which is a live music project, the FNR, during a live event, people can pay in ELA. It's already possible. And we'll put the link up in the speaker notes. I've shared it in the community a couple of times already. So these creators, in the end, they don't mind, because the alternative is not being paid, right? And then Danny from New Zealand, another community member, shout out to him as well. He said, well, wait a minute, as a platform, you could always also say these photographers, they actually should accept ELA, because then it becomes kind of like an investment vehicle. Expecting that the ELA will rise in the future, especially when there's more traffic, it might actually be very interesting to be paid in our crypto. Now, these are just a couple of different thoughts that actually all make all have a very good use case. The first one that we could realistically build is allowing people to get paid in ELA, because that's something that we already have. Next step would be really nice if we have some form of stablecoin and or fiat gateway. Now, let's go back to the beginning a little bit, because we had two different thoughts, right? We had the thought of a business model that is for the smart web owned by the community. So maybe managed by Orchard or managed by Clarence and his team, doesn't really matter. But paid for 100% from the Cyber Republic, and a real business model. So yeah, a business where there's a business behind it who wants to make money out of it. Let's start with the second one first. So if you are a business who would like to make some form of income here, then actually Sash already mentioned it. Because if this is an open source project, or if you would approach this as an open source project, then what you want to do as a business is offer different kind of services to particularly those corporations. So if there's a corporation that really wants to advertise on the platform, but could not be bothered with purchasing crypto in order to get there, well, then there's a service model there for any business. If there's a corporation that really doesn't want to go as deep as purchasing decentralized data on a decentralized marketplace, then they can give the order to an agency, and this agency becomes kind of like an advertising agency. It could also be that these corporations have different sets of assignments that they have. They have different sets of briefings maybe, but they don't want to do it themselves. So then they could hire you as an agency to put out a briefing, so that the agency can find the right photographers for their briefing and gets a cut there. So there are all sorts of different services that you can offer, and that can be very profitable still.
Jochem, quick question, if you don't mind. So in regards to Unsplash and their business model, what kind of operational costs do they have?
Unsplash or Unsplash?
Sorry, Unsplash.
Well, I'm not the Unsplash expert, right? But I can imagine that there are a whole bunch of server costs that need to be covered. The curation team, they will probably have, and that's the next topic. They will probably have shareholders that it's not really a cost, but at least they expect some form of profit. So the curation team and the maintenance of the software itself, the servers, that's probably where most of the cost will be. Just my best estimate, because I'm not a super expert on their platform, but this is what I would believe.
And then in this Unsplash model here, given that a photographer uploads their image, how is it managed as far as the data itself? And when they're bidding to win a contract over, say, with a corporation, are they sending that data to them in a smart contract that's potentially timed, or do they hold it themselves? But how is that kind of peer-to-peer exchange done without the data being almost? Because is there an element where you could have a corporation who receives the image and they have that for a period of time that they kind of have control over before it goes back, and then they kind of agree to it, or is it completely in the photographer's control during the whole process?
No, I think that you're giving part of the solution there already yourself. So, it's a very interesting concept that you actually put out there. So, what happens if there's a corporation that puts out an assignment to a photographer, but doesn't want to pay yet until they get the image? So, you could have a system, for example, where the photographer makes those images, maybe already gets a very small share of the payment beforehand as part of the smart contract, could very well be possible, and then sends the low resolution image towards the corporation. And then only once the corporation approves, which means that they accepting a payment and they send the payment, then automatically the high resolution image can be sent after. Something like that.
That's a great workaround. That's brilliant. Yeah, really interesting.
It's very interesting. Then the other thing is that which is going to take another year to get ready, which is the Hive++, which is pretty much the decentralized storage. That means that this photographer could choose herself where she wants to store the images. Could be literally on the person's own on Google Drive, but it could also be on a decentralized storage solution. And that way, much of the operating cost in terms of the servers you take out. So much of those costs are no longer with you. So either the creative needs to pay for it yourself, or it can be done on storage that the person already owns. Can be an ELA box, right? So Adam is building an ELA box, which is a little piece of hardware where in the future you might be able to store your own data. So how this would technically work, I would say, hello, ToomTech, hi, Donnie and KP and the amazing team over there. Give us a little hand there, but these are possible. These are possibilities. Could be done with NFTs, could probably also be done with digital identifiers. There are technical options there, but that's not. I don't think that's not the first ideation that you do. This is going very deep. So this would take another 10 weeks to go that deep. But these are very good questions. Thanks.
Well, it does seem, sorry, just to go in there, obviously blockchains as a tool, they're great at, logging and ownership tracking, but the issue we still have is the idea of replication. And, what would be great here, where you have an internet of value, so you have, the Elastos network to utilize, would I guess be the idea that you can, with your DID, you can encrypt your image in a way that can't just be copied and pasted like we see today, but you can attach a smart contract that allows the corporation that you're working with to basically also be able to view that image for a set period of time, whilst using the carrier peer-to-peer network to communicate directly with them. Because that's certainly the kind of idea of just being able to replicate data on the internet is a massive pain point. And blockchains don't necessarily deal with that, but that's where Elastos and the idea of the network OS and the internet of value comes in and adds an additional tool and a layer to that.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And now add another dimension here, which can be direct printing, for example. Or maybe 3D printing. What happens if you've got, instead of the creative, the photographer, you've got digital artists who create stuff in 3D? You can potentially 3D print that in any part of the world. Well, there must be a 3D printer somewhere, but and you can then use blockchain to make sure that there's only one print made. This is a complicated topic because you would still need the right software installed on those printers, right? So it's not as easy as it sounds, but there should definitely be possibilities there if it needs to be done in a decentralized way.
I think you're absolutely right to extrapolate this out from the photo, the 2D image of the photo, to anything digital. And Sash's point goes back to the double spend problem that this is helping to solve. So if you were to take any three-dimensional image that you wanted to print, and it could therefore be a new part for a machine, or something that you might, some technical gadget that you might need, you could actually send the code for that across the planet with a reference that it can only make 10 copies of it. And that is where the value is added back into the originator, because they then know that 10 copies have been printed, and they know by whom and at what point, and they know that 11 copies can't be made.
Yeah, I think that you coined the principle of the double spend of data or something like that, right, Chris? So what was it again that you called it?
Yeah, digital double spend.
So, digital double spend, yeah, I think it's a really good term to use because it covers pretty much big problem that we're facing in the internet as you speak, right? So in the internet as we know it. So it's a very good term.
It's not my term. I think Satoshi used the double spend problem in his white paper.
Yeah, but you added the word digital to it, which
or data. I mean, you could, yeah. I mean, you could absolutely. Elastos solves the data double spend problem.
Yeah, I think that's a very good approach. So then the last thing that I would like to touch upon has to do with what would this look like if it were a killer dApp created by the Cyber Republic for the Cyber Republic, managed by the Cyber Republic. Because I think that obviously a lot of us, we are investors, or at least we see ourselves as investors, right? But one of the key things that we really need to realize is that we all invested in utility tokens. So none of us is an actual shareholder of a company. We're not. And that also means that when you invest in a utility token, the most sustainable way to actually increase the value of that token is by giving it more utility. So this is also why I believe it's so important that we as a community, we build a couple of those killer dApps ourselves, not just to get a lot of users, but to solve A, real pains, but B, to create utility for a token. So now let's imagine that this is a community dApp without very strong commercial needs, other than making sure that interaction in ELA happens, or interaction between people happens in general. So then something very interesting happens, because for us, we cannot pay out any profit, right? There's no profit sharing in a utility ecosystem. That also means that whenever there's a corporation who wants to advertise on the platform, pretty much, well, maybe even 100% of the advertising payments that they do can then go to those photographers, or value as an incentive to the users, so the passive users or the other creatives. So that makes it suddenly very interesting, because we cannot accept any profit because we cannot pay it out. There's simply no way for ELA to pay out profit. The supernodes pay out, but that's also not profit. It's just supernode reward. It's something very different than profit. So what happens if versus Unsplash, where Unsplash obviously they add a great deal of value, right? This is absolutely not me bashing Unsplash. They create a lot of value, but what they don't do is give any of the advertising revenue to photographers. That's not happening. Well, in our system, we actually depend on giving as much as we can to those photographers, because that means that more high-level photographers will be incentivized to come to us. That means that they will bring their following, which are those passive users and the other creatives. That means that you create communities, you stimulate creating communities. That means that more of those corporations will come. It means that more of those corporations will want to purchase data from the users in order to be able to advertise to them. That means that the users and those photographers can get more income for their work, for their value, whether the value is adding feedback or giving feedback to the photographers, or just voting or saying nothing. Whatever they do, they can get a bigger share of the advertising income, because it's all decentralized. And what everything that we care about, what we really care about, is creating utility. That's what that's the only focus that we should have as a community. So this is very interesting, because this would create an upward spiral. And this upward spiral is what will make such an idea like this a killer dApp. Nothing else. You need to create utility, and you need to be able to bring in fresh income via those advertisers, companies that want to set out, challenges for those photographers, or briefings for those photographers. The more smart contracts that you can execute, the more traffic that happens on the platform, the more work the DPoS nodes will do, the more gas is paid out, the more interesting it is to be part of our ecosystem. And yeah, you create an upward spiral. So this, in my mind, really is a community-owned business model of the future.
Rather than value adding. So this would be a really interesting change. Yeah, I love it. I think we should definitely be looking at this. And as you were talking about those pain points right at the start, I was thinking about the CR website in its own right, in that that is a site that takes ideas from people, but there are so many pain points that we need to map out actually at the moment. If we want it to be the place where everybody wants to put their knowledge and inspire a communication and a debate between people of different countries on different continents, then actually we need to look through all of those pain points and remove them. We need to go through those early processes that Lara went through with this. And we could probably spend some of our own ELA on updating that site so that it makes it intuitive and educational and informative and exciting to be there, to bring people in, to add value in this upward spiral of utility that you're talking about. Because the more ideas we get, the better, the more we know about, or the more contribution that we get, and the more people putting their hands up, the more that the community grows, and the more it grows and the more we can build on it, the better everyone is.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So am I correct that you're actually saying, hey, why not creating that upward spiral on the Cyber Republic website itself already? For all I care, create a Cyber Republic token that people can own and use on the Cyber Republic website to vote, to help in the governance, to get upvotes, downvotes, some kind of community building. I've got no idea if it's feasible, to be honest. Is it just an idea that I see that was planted in my head somehow, but could be quite interesting.
Yeah, you might not need a different token either. You could just use ELA, but I think it would be, we've got all these principles of great decentralized business, even the process that you've discussed, and I think we should apply that to what we're currently sitting on at the moment, so that we can make it as good as we possibly can with those design principles and achieve the success that we all want.
Yeah, I think it's really crucial. And I was having a chat the other day with Clarence, and we were talking about the idea that people don't really care so much about their privacy today, and it's not something which why aren't these business models, why hasn't the killer DApp happened yet, and why hasn't it taken off? And it's kind of one of the big blocks at the moment seems to be that people don't necessarily, I think people want to monetize their data. I think they like that idea, but I don't think they realize kind of what it can do for them and what value this kind of system and business model can bring you as an individual. And as it currently would go, it's it's a repeatable process, so that's very good for blockchain usage as a tool. And it's just not being utilized enough. So I kind of think it's going to become more and more apparent as technology gets more powerful over time. And when you think that back in the 80s, we had a big phone, and now it's turned into a small little smartphone, which you can do everything on. In the same way, we've got new technologies heading our way. We've got robotics, we've got automation, and most importantly, we've got AI. And I think we're gonna want to monetize our data a lot more as time goes on, and we're gonna want to have security as well. And so as a business, being able to incorporate this business model and really start to think about how you can bring an idea and bring a decentralized model in, I think you're catching a window which is going to really take off in the coming years. It's an important matter.
Yeah. I think if I may add to that, because I'm not 100% if I fully agree with Clarence there. One of the big problems I see in this decentralized space right now is that once people see profit and money, they want to take more. And a beautiful case is Uptick, right? Uptick is an amazing product. Really, Brian and the DMA team has done an amazing job there. And I think that if we take some time together as a community to promote it or to white label it and offer it to different whatever museums, whatever you can think of, it adds a huge amount of value. Of course, we still need to solve the fiat gateway problem, but it adds a huge amount of value. Now there is their competitor called Guts, and Guts is very expensive. If you want to sell your tickets using Guts, then the person who issues those tickets needs to pay a very high fee. So they started off really good, and then they saw the money, or they saw the cost, and they increased those fees. So what they are doing is actually not that different from a Ticketmaster, for example. So And again, my goal is not to bash these projects, because they're still, both Ticketmaster is the biggest in the world for a reason, or one of the biggest, and Guts is doing pretty well as well. But the moment that people see these opportunities and see the opportunity to make more money, they go for it. Well, for us as a community, what we need is way more utility and an additional markup for marketing cost and for server cost and that sort of stuff is of less importance to us, because or for the profit is of less importance to us, because we don't do any profit payouts anyway.
Yeah. I think you're spot on there. I disagree with your first statement as well about people not really caring about their data. I think when you expose it to people, what happens to their data, then they become really quite excited by it. It's just that I think there's a very poor understanding of what is happening to their data. Sure. When it's taken and resold, particularly, but also that they don't have it, because we can't conceptualize it yet, because it doesn't exist in a form that we all appreciate. But people can't see their own net value as well. You know, on the internet, what is your net worth? Well, we create data all the time that's being used by these large organizations. Yeah. And when Facebook launched something called Beacon in 2007, where it would tell your friends what it is you were looking at buying without your permission, the users went nuts and didn't want it at all. And actually they did remove it after a while, but the whole point was that they could do it back then. You know, 14 years ago, Facebook was already starting to make these moves. You know, and again, I think we have to give them credit for doing that. But what it did expose at the time was just where the line was drawn, and so they were pushing right up to that. And I think what we've found in the subsequent years is that people are prepared to download an app onto their phone and start using it if they think it's free. But what they're not connecting, what we're all not connecting at the moment, is the fact that, of course, it's not free. We are paying. We're paying with the data that we create and we give those companies. And then when they aggregate that data, it's hugely useful. So we've got to not only intervene to allow people to generate the dividend that their own data is creating for them, but also get to a point where we're protecting and demonstrating to them what they could be earning with that data, and the value of themselves, which I think people overlook at the moment.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Chris. It is, you know, people don't necessarily realize the value themselves, and you kind of think with a corporation or something that's not open source and the algorithms are hidden, they're very, services are very clever at making, almost gamifying these services and products in a way. Instagram is just so you just want to jump on and use it, and you're giving your data to these companies who are then making money off you, but you're loving the process of doing it. But we're saying here is you can still have that same thing and we can still create this world, but the difference is you'll also be rewarded for using that platform, because it's currently going to someone else.
Well, you mentioned AI earlier on. I think that's a really good point, because AI is a huge consumer of this data. And to make our artificial intelligence better, we've got to feed it with data. And I think we all appreciate that. So, Jochem raised a really good point earlier about the digital data marketplace. There are markets that already exist out there. They're very hidden most of the time, but there's a lot of money, billions of dollars being pushed through those data sales marketplaces. And it's because people want to predict the future, and they want the data so that they can tell us and shape our own behaviors in the future. So in the decentralized business world that we're going to create, we also need to create the digital data marketplaces so people can buy data. They also want to know that the data has been given appropriately and will be handled responsibly, and the people that have given that data will want some reward for it, and they can do that directly, as opposed to what's happening now, which is we don't know where our data is. It's being sold effectively on black markets that we don't have any control of or sight of, and then we are never rewarded for that data. In fact, what happens is that people push things back to us, and we are surprised why.
Yeah, I think those are very interesting points. And what you both are saying is that we really need to go then a paradigm shift needs to happen from, hey, I like this app because it's free, to, hey, I don't like this app because it doesn't allow me to sell my own data. So what's in it for me? That's a very big paradigm shift that we should all be fighting for together. Not just as Elastos community, but I think that is the whole data capitalization movement, or your own data movement. It's really a big responsibility that all those projects out there need to be fighting for this, because this is.
Well, I'll make a prediction that this time next year, that movement that you've been talking about, the getting a dividend from your own data, getting a return on your own investment in time on the internet, on your phone, that is going to be a global movement in the next 12 months. Where I think this is part of the paradigm shift that we're seeing with everything else that's extraordinary going on in the world, as we spend much more time on the internet over the next 12 months as a result of coronavirus, and our behaviors change because of how we want to go shopping or socialize and everything else. As we start to understand the financial and the monetary issues that are going on, I suspect that, when we reflect on this in June 2021, that which we can do.
I'll hold you to an ELA for that, Chris.
You can hold me to one
Which
ELA.
will be worth a lot of money then as well. So
I hope so. But let's hope that actually that movement is alive and well, and people really understand it. And if we can have a part to play in helping educate people about the fact that they are giving away their data at the moment, and it's not just their immediate loss, but it's the oligopoly's gain, and probably to their further disbenefit, then actually I think we will have done something really special.
Yeah, it's certainly life-changing for, we think about the progression of moving everything to a better future. It's going the right way. We didn't really ask for blockchain. We think we predict these specific technologies that, in whether it's a sci-fi movie and we see AI and we see all these things that then we bring to life. But actually, Bitcoin came out of nowhere, and there were previous tries at different parts of the Bitcoin, but actually it was the first product that successfully showed what blockchain technology is possible of. And what I really took away from this, Jochem, is the idea of having utility, the idea of it being a utility token. So we're not where a corporation would have, its stakeholders, its shareholders, and you want to enrich the company as much as possible to get as much money back. And you saw in 2008, there was the stock buyback. So all this bailout money was given, and these corporations, they didn't put it into their company to make a better system. They just bought their own shares back and enriched everyone who held the shares. And where you've got a utility token, it's so different, because what we want to see is we're not owning shares of Elastos, but we're owning utility tokens to use on the smart web. So we want to see the smart web grow and become bigger and better and have more services. And that is how you get enriched with the utility token, which you can then use on the smart web to do more amazing things. Really, really interesting. And really great, Jochem.
Yeah, thank you so much. Are there any other important takeouts that we can round off with?
I just wanted to ask you about the design principles. So we covered value, security, and privacy of users. Were there another 4 that I've missed?
Yeah, there are a couple of others that she implemented here. There's going to take another deep dive, I think.
Okay, well, that we can save that for later then. But I mean, I think those 3 alone have caused a really fascinating conversation, and actually, adding value into both the business and the user themselves, providing security for both, and the privacy that you were talking about, which actually I think is also a freedom that you gain by knowing that your data is going to be used in a particular way or not. I think are 3 really fascinating areas that would be of clear benefit when you're trying to work through this process of designing a new business.
Yeah, maybe to add one, just in case Don Tapscott decides to listen to this podcast as well. Another big one, obviously, is the rights preserved design principle. So using these kind of technologies, you can give back the rights to the creators. Rights management becomes possible. So that's a very big one. And then I would say that if there's anyone out there who's interested in learning more about this, entrepreneurs, startups, or existing businesses, I would say just touch base with us, because I think that it would be very interesting for us, but also for businesses to see how we can help each other and what we can do in order to train people to understand how to build these kind of decentralized business models, because I think it's needed and it's fun. And as you already stated, Chris, there are quite a lot of business opportunities here as well that have not been tapped into properly by anyone yet. So yeah, this is the good time for them.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, and actually, there's something to be said for either being the disruptor or being disrupted by what's going on at the moment. So if businesses want to sit there and think that they're going to be okay in 5 years just by retaining the current business model, then they could do that. But an alternative approach is to take the one you're suggesting here and have a look at what other possible, what else is viable in the future, and that's increasing. So, there's real benefit for companies to understand that, and actually it's good fun to have a think about it.